All right, hey guys. So we are starting our week 4 live session. I'm just waiting for the YouTube stream to show up. Cool. Looks like it's working. It's not really updating too well. Can you guys see everything on my screen? Looks like it's pinwheeling for me a little bit, but it could just be my YouTube browser isn't updating properly. Cool. All right, we're going to assume we're good. Hope everybody's doing all right, staying safe. This last activity is going to be a pretty fun one, I think, for everybody. We're just taking some of the information we had from the character activity, and then we're going to apply that into Nuke. Now, Nuke is going to be a little bit of a shock to a lot of you because it's a very different workflow. I'm assuming all of you have Nuke installed, and you have like the license working. If you do not, I think the information was back in your previous class. I'd recommend on the LMS just going back to your last term, looking at the class, because you can access any class's content that you've taken previously. Go back a month and look at the Nuke installation activity. I do have the videos for the Nuke installation. I can send that to anybody that still needs help with it or can't access their previous information, but we will need to get that working for this class. Now, even if like you do have license issues with Nuke, there are non-commercial versions of it that still work totally fine. Even if you're unable to get the official licensed one working, there are other options with Nuke, and we'll kind of look into that. Okay, so let me show you basically what we're doing this week to wrap everything up. So back on the LMS, just like every other week, we had 3 activities. I know you guys have all turned this one in. I'm only maybe about halfway in the critiques right now for this one, so I'm a little bit behind. But we have our live session, our introduction to Nuke. That's what we're kind of focusing on today, and 4.3. Now, really, what I'm going to do here, because I just recently changed this activity a little bit, the live session we're doing today is pretty much going to walk you through the entire Nuke activity. So this thing we're doing here is going to be your walkthrough for 4.3. And I'm doing it that way because since Nuke is a very new software for everybody, I really want to make sure that we are like going through the whole thing together. We're not skipping over everything. I want this to be very, very clear about how the software works and what you guys are doing for the last activity. It's not really anything too difficult. It's very different than Maya, so it does take a little bit to get used to some of the controls. All right. So what I'm going to do is hop into 4.3, since this is primarily what we're going to be talking about, even though 4.2 is the live session. So we'll kind of skip past all this stuff, but basically, what we're going to do, and you can see the first step is review the information discussed in the week 4 live session. This is us today. We're going to open up some of our Maya files from earlier in the week, the character lighting project, and what we're going to try to do here is we're going to render the lights from the bonus image separately. So you guys all, you might have had like 2 lights, 3 lights. A couple of you guys got crazy and you had like 5 or 6 lights. Whatever the lights are from your bonus render, we are going to create images of each light separately just by simply hiding and unhiding lights. This part's pretty easy. And then once we get these images rendered out, the goal is like when we get inside a Nuke, we're going to build a really simple node graph or node tree. So we're just going to read in our images, load them into Nuke, change a couple things. Like I'm going to have you guys change the colors on your lights a little bit. Just, you might make your key light. Maybe if it was red, you want to make it like a cool blue. If you have like a backlight behind the character, you can, make that a lot brighter or darker. So all you're really doing is bringing the lights information, the images from Maya into Nuke, changing their color and intensity to whatever you want to do. You're going to combine them back together. And then we're going to do this thing called a vignette down here where we change, we add like a gradient to that render. You can probably see it on this one. Oh, that's weird. I have the same image in here twice. All right, that's fine. But on this one right here, this has the vignette. So one thing we're also going to do in Nuke is give it this little gradient where it kind of darkens out to the corner of the frame. But once you kind of get through this whole Nuke thing, you are then simply presenting your work. So you're just going to organize a couple things like from this week, your character lighting file, the Nuke project that we're literally doing right now, the render from Maya, the render from Nuke. You're just comparing what you did this week with all the character stuff. You can also talk about previous activities if you want, like if you like the environment lighting or some stuff you did back in week 1 or 2 with the cameras, you can totally bring that stuff up as well. And you guys are recording basically a super simple OBS presentation. I know a lot of you guys are using other softwares, because OBS is super sketchy. Like you might be doing Camtasia or Bandicam or the built-in Windows recorder. It doesn't really matter what you guys use to record it. But it's really just going to be a 3 to 5 minute video, and all you're doing is just showing me your work this week, like the character lighting file, your character bonus render, what that looks like, how you made it, and you're going to bring up your Nuke script that we're doing today. So everything we're talking about in the live session with this activity, you're really just showing this off in the presentation. Here's what my Nuke script looks like. Here's how I constructed it. Here's my updated render after the Nuke process. Like I changed this color here. I made this light darker, made this one, a lot brighter. And you're just really showing off what you've got. Again, only 3 to 5 minutes, nothing too crazy. And then optionally, you guys can, if you have some time, you can talk about some other things you learned in the class as well, or what you're excited about learning in the future. And all that is uploaded to the activity. So I'll be using this presentation to basically grade what you're doing with the Nuke activity. But we're going to hop in here and do this. And as I'm going through this, if you guys have any questions, feel free to type them in our chat. I'll try to answer stuff as we go, because I want to make sure you're all very, very comfortable with this project. This one's going to be kind of fun. Okay, so I'm inside my lighting project. This is the one I use to make all my little example renders. And you can see I have all these things labeled over here. I've got my different display layers where all the lights are set up in different positions. Some have different backgrounds than other ones, but you know what? I'm going to let you guys pick which one we're going to do today. Let me find my examples. So you guys are going to choose your own destiny here. Okay, yeah. So out of these bonus images, I'm just going to open them up in order. Which one do you guys want me to use inside of Nuke? Basically, what we're going to do is just we're going to export the lights out separately, change the color, and then recolor it inside of Nuke. What are you guys feeling? 1, 2, 3, or 4? The red and blue. Number 3. We're going for it. 3 it is. Okay. Yep, everyone likes this one. This one's pretty fun. All right, so we're going to do bonus number 3. So I have 3 lights that make up this one. Obviously, there's kind of a red and a cool one, a red more of like an aqua teal color. I have like a white rim light behind the shoulders. So let's look at the setup for it. I'm just going to leave this open so I can compare to it. So that's what it should look like. That would be, I think it's the Badger. See, do I have a background behind it? I don't know if I do. Now with this one, I'm going to change one thing because I want you guys to see the gradient behind it. So just give me 1 second because I want to see if I can get a light behind the character for this particular one. Because I think if I render this from the front, yeah, I don't think we're going to be able to see the background. There it is. Oh, actually, yeah, you can kind of see it. It's not the most exciting one, so I think what I may do for this is I'm going to just really quickly change this. I'm going to back this up a little bit for this render and just make it a little bit larger here. And I'm going to take the white light, my rim, I'm going to do Control D to duplicate it. So Control D is duplicate, W, and I'm going to flip this guy around so I almost create like a faint white light it hitting the background kind of behind the shoulder like this. There we go. Just so I have like something back there, so it kind of feels like there's a little bit more information behind it that we can play around with inside of Nuke. So I just moved the light really close to the wall just to kind of have it cast upwards and give me this little like backsplash right behind the shoulder. All right, that should work. So we just added another light, but that's fine. It'll all work out. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is once you're inside your character lighting project, make sure you have your bonus layer visible, right? So all my lights are turned on. You know, I've done my test render. It looks like the bonus image, so I feel pretty good about this so far. Now, what we're going to do is I need to render each light separately to get a separate image. And it's super simple because really the only thing you have to do to get each light to render separately is hide the lights you don't need. So as long as only one light's visible, when you render it, you will only get the one light. So let me make sure they're all grouped together because this one is in the wrong spot. Oh, by the way, I don't think I've showed you guys this. If you want to move things around in the outliner, because you can change the order of this stuff. If you hold down your middle mouse button and drag it around, see how it's like it's moving right now? And if you pick between two things, not on it, but between it, like there's a line and a release, it will move the item at that point in the list. If you accidentally drag on another thing, when it turns to like a box, that means you're putting it inside of it. So it's almost like this is a container for the other light, which means if you click on the rim light and hit W for me to move it, see how that the other rim light that I just moved is now stuck inside of it? Watch what happens when I move the rim light. See how the other one's moving with it? Because it thinks these two are like grouped together. Actually, it's the same thing as groups. So the things you guys were doing back in week 2 with grouping, that's basically what happened right here. We just made a group by accidentally middle mouse dragging a light onto another light. So I'm going to middle mouse drag that out. Come on. There we go. And it pops out. Yeah, and if you ever want to delete a light, it is super easy. There is a backspace button on your keyboard. So hit backspace. Just click on the light you want in the outliner, hit backspace, it will go away. I think the delete button might work. Yeah, delete also works. So right above the backspace button, right to the top right of your keyboard, there is a delete key that also works. And you can also, I think, do it up here somewhere. Delete, yeah, that it will also work. But I think the little button on the keyboard is a lot easier. Yep. It's yeah, extremely easy. It's not very obvious because it's not like they tell you how to delete it. I just know that from kind of habit because the backspace and delete key tend to kind of do the same thing in every software. All right. So what I'm going to do is let's just kind of kick off our render first. So in this view, I'm going to hit the R button over here just to launch our image tool. And I could let this finish if I wanted to, but this is the full final render. I really don't need this because we've already done this image before anyway. I want to get the other information. So I'm going to hit cancel, and cancel's right there. I'm just going to minimize this again. What we're going to do is, because I know where the lights are located in the outliner, we're just going to go through these one by one and hide the other ones. So I'm going to start with the red, Badger red light, which means I'm just going to select the lights below it, and we're going to hit H to hide it. So H, remember, is our hotkey to hide anything we don't want to see. So see how it only looks like there's one light visible? And remember, the display layer still has to be turned on because this will hide everything if you have it turned off. So only one light visible. Let's go over here, set the button again. And oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, there's the wrong camera. And that's how you don't do it. Let's try clicking inside the right camera this time. And now we'll hit it. There we go. Perfect. And there's our red light. And so, when you guys do it, you're going to wait for the whole thing to finish. Now, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to spend a lot of time just waiting for the render right now. So what I'm going to do is at 10%, we're going to kill it. I'm going to hit cancel. That's good enough for me. It is by no means perfect. There's a lot of grain, but that's totally fine for today's lecture. You guys will want to let your renders finish so they're nice and clean though. All right. Let's move on to the next one. So there's one render finished. Okay. So now I'm going to click on the red light, H, to hide it. Let's go with the next one down, H. We're unhiding the cyan. Come over here. I'm going to use the same R. I think I just did the wrong camera again. Nope, I did the right one. Good. So we're going to do R. It's rendering it, and then once I get to about 10%, we're just going to kill it and keep going. And we'll stop that. You could turn off the layers if you wanted to. It kind of depends how you set up the bonus render. Like if you guys, because I know a couple of you may have put each light on each individual layer. Like this is bonus light 1, this is bonus light 2, bonus light 3. If you broke up your lights on each display layer, that would, yeah, you don't have to do any of this. You actually can just turn your layers on and off until it shows you the right light source. So that is also totally acceptable. The only reason I couldn't do it is because my layer, the way I did it, is I have like multiple lights on one layer, and so I have to go through this other step of using H to hide things. But yeah. And the menu, I assume you're meaning this thing at the top, or maybe the catalog. The catalog is that, it's C. Inspector is another one that sometimes pops up. I don't like to use that thing, but catalog you definitely want. And this whole thing at the top right here, this is the image tools. Monitor controls are this. Actually, you don't really need monitor controls turned on. And yeah, so I usually have catalog, image tools, and pixel readout turned on, and window always on top, but that's pretty much it. Okay, so we got that one. All right, those are good. Sweet. All right, let's do it again. So click H, go to the next light, hit H. So here's our backlight behind the head. Cool. So we're just going to still make sure we're in the right camera. Hit the R button again. And there we go. Now this one is probably going to be kind of grainy. This one, the reason why this is going to look a lot worse than the others is because this guy is a lot of bounced light. And bounced light is one of the biggest reasons why we deal with render grain. So you know how like the other guys, like they didn't look that bad, even at low quality? This thing's like 30% in and it still looks like garbage. It's because when the light hits the head and you think about what is illuminating this back area right here, because there's not a light facing it, right? That's the bounced light. So it's having a really hard time having the light hit the head and then calculate what it looks like bouncing backwards into these areas. So all those like shadowed sections that are very grainy, those are areas that are only being illuminated by indirect light. And that's one of our biggest things that we're always trying to battle with and clean up when we're doing our renders. So for this one, I think what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to let this one just ride itself out. It's almost done anyway. And then we'll save this one out as the clean version because this one is going to look pretty bad if I don't let it finish. It's almost done anyway. It tends to pick up speed quite a bit as you get closer to the end. It's like the first 20% is kind of bad, and then you may have noticed that the percentage really starts to like kind of crank itself up pretty quick the deeper you get into the render. Yes, and you're totally right. So it's a good question. Could you clean it up by adding more samples? Absolutely. And this is a great example. Like, let's say you were doing this like maybe this is a shot you're doing for like a magazine ad, and this is the only light source they want in there. They want this very dark, you know, or actually like a high contrast image, almost like a film noir, where you can't see the face, and they want it to be that dark in the background. So it really should be set up this way. If you had to clean this up, what you do in the render settings over here, because mine are still kind of low. This is not even at 256. This would go up to 256. And this guy is the one that's really killing it. I might crank that up to like 12, 3 times roughly what you guys were doing because you had it set to 4. I'd crank that guy up to 12, and hopefully that would be a lot cleaner. And you could also make like a larger resolution image. That also helps because you're adding more information by adding more pixels. So there's a lot of ways to do it, but yes, you're right. Adding samples would definitely clean that up. Yep. It's when you kind of get like into bigger projects, you guys are going to start using render settings a lot differently. Right now, you're basically just being told, like, put the number in here, put this number here, hit render. It should look pretty good. But when you start doing your own projects, you're not going to be relying on someone to tell you, put these numbers in there. You'll sort of just know how the render settings work, and you're going to start like custom tailoring them to like work specifically for your activity. Like it's using a lot of indirect light, crank the indirect light samples up. If you have a lot of metal materials and like, rough textures where there's a lot of like different material properties going on, then in that case you might use BXDF samples. This is one of the things we're going to talk about in shading and lighting too. So yep, we'll get more into that. So that one's done. Let's do the last one. So again, H to unhide it, and this is the light I just added behind everything. So there we go. This one's also fairly grainy, but it's not going to be quite as bad as this guy. You're not seeing the blue squares. That's interesting. It might be this. I wonder. It's that. Okay, that's actually kind of good to know. I don't think I've ever turned it off before. At some point, I think you must have hit the B key. When you're in the image tool, B is the hotkey for it, and it's not showing you what's called the buckets or tiles of the samples. So if you hit B or just go into View and turn that back on, you'll see it again. You should. I mean, maybe not. Weird things can happen. All right. That'll probably do it. Yeah. Yeah. My issue is the cat on the laptop. That my poor cat has messed up so many things before. Yeah, yeah. He may have hit a bunch of keys then, because it'll also like there's like color channels you can view with like A, C, D, F, G. One of these guys will show like black and white channels instead of color, and then I think if you go to A, it goes back to color. So it's cool to have the hotkeys, but yeah, if you have someone slap the keyboard when you have this thing open, I mean, who knows what the heck's going to happen? It's about 20 things that'll start turning on. All right. So far, this makes sense, guys? Like, it's really easy, right? We started with this. We're just breaking up into the individual images, and we're going to then save these out of Maya, and we're going to go into Nuke. So remember, when we save these out, obviously when they're clean, not grainy like I did, we do want to make sure that in the catalog, we have burn in mapping on save turned on, right? That's going to make sure the image we save out looks exactly the same. It's the same intensity. If that's turned off, that's when our image outside of Maya looks too dark. So we don't want to forget that. Okay, now we have it on, so we're going to click on our first image, just selecting it in the catalog, File, Export File. We're going to choose where we want to put it. So I'm going to go to the desktop, and what I'm going to do is in the character project, I might make a new folder. Yeah, because my images folder is kind of cranked. We're going to make a new folder for this, and you guys can do the same thing if you want. Or there was a folder for it. Oh, they took away the button. That was weird. I could have sworn there was a way to make a new folder in here. All right, hold please. Let's go in here and just add it ourselves. So we're going to go to the folder itself, right click, new folder, or hit the new folder button up there. And we're just going to call this Nuke. So I'm making a folder in my project for Nuke. And you guys can save it outside of it. You can put it on your desktop. It doesn't really matter, but I kind of like to leave all my files together for the same activity. So Nuke, and we're going to call this, let's call this one bonus one, and we'll have it set to a PNG. And I'm just going to save it, and I really want to make sure immediately this even looks right before we go on to the other lights. So if we go in our Nuke folder, yep, and that looks exactly like what we had here. So I always like to double check that. It opens, it matches, so we can keep on moving forward. We're doing it right. All right, next one. Let's click on the next guy down. This is still turned on, so as long as we don't close out of the image tool, we don't have to keep redoing that part. So we're going to click Export File. I'm just going to click on this to quickly put the name down here, and then I'm going to click and change it to 2. Save. So we're going to do it again. Click, Export File, change the name to bonus 3. Okay, and we'll do the last one here for bonus 4. Okay, so I've just named it bonus 1, 2, 3, 4, PNG format, really straightforward. And I think from here we really don't even need to be in Maya. You might want to leave it open like for the presentation, just in case you want to go back in here and show what you did. But you can also open this up again later if you want when you start recording. So it's up to you if you want to save it. We didn't. It's not really like we did much anyway. So even if you didn't save any of your work from this, I mean, all we really did is go into Maya and use H to hide and unhide lights. So nothing too difficult. Let's get into Nuke. This is really what we're all here for. The Maya part is pretty straightforward. Anytime. There we go. Please don't judge my crazy desktop. This is all. I just have screenshots of all of these critiques I've been doing with different students. It's getting a little bit messy, and I got to clean this thing up. All right. So now Nuke is already installed for me. I have it down here on my taskbar. So you already might have this thing down here as well. If you don't have Nuke, or you might have a lot of shortcuts, what you guys have probably noticed is that Nuke has a lot of versions. Now, I know the version I'm using, like the number, is going to be a little different from you guys. I want to say some of you, or maybe it was last month, someone told me they're using, I think, Nuke 12. That might be the one they're up to now. It doesn't really matter if you're on my version, a newer version. Nuke is always kind of the same. It's very stable. It rarely has issues. It very infrequently crashes. Like Maya is much more unstable than Nuke. This is old reliable here. So even if your version is different, don't worry, you're still going to be fine. Now, the key thing here is, aside from the number, it is important to know which one of these to pick. Because you can see that some say Nuke, Nuke Assist, Nuke Studio, and then we have Nuke X right here. And now we have the same thing but non-commercial. Nuke 11 non-commercial, Nuke X non-commercial, Nuke Studio non-commercial. So the main difference between these ones that don't say non-commercial, just the regular ones, these are the ones that work with your provided license. You guys all have one, okay? So these are like the real paid-for versions of Nuke. These are the ones that you did not pay for that are more of like a trial. So you only use non-commercial if your license is broken. This only works for a certain amount of time and then it just stops working altogether, but you can use this as a backup if you don't have access to these because you don't have your Nuke license. This is your backup plan. Now, between the different types of Nuke, the one you guys are going to use is Nuke X. Nuke X is the 64-bit version of Nuke. Nuke without the X is the 32-bit. And that really just, the one you pick out of these is totally dependent on your operating system. So it's all based off like which version of Windows, or if you're on a Mac, which OS are you using, or is it Linux? That's really why we're picking one or the other. We are going to be using Nuke X, and there's not that big of a difference between the two. So we're going to open this up. Now, when some of you guys open this, if you have not opened Nuke X before, you will see something very different compared to what I'm seeing. And I'm going to mess this up so you can see it. My Nuke looks kind of, things look normal, right? Like I can, if I were to like make something, there's sliders, I can clearly see sliders, I can read numbers, text is very legible, right? It's nothing, it's menus over here, it looks very normal. I'm going to close out this for a second because when you guys open up Nuke for the first time, it may not look like that. Okay, I'm going to change this back to what you guys are going to see if you haven't done this. Okay, let's hit OK, apply. Okay, I'm just going to reset it. This is because you guys probably haven't done this yet. Hopefully this looks right. Oh yeah, this is what some of you are going to see. And it's very important that we're going over this in the live session because this will annoy some of you to death. Doesn't this look great? Can't you guys clearly see all the text, right? That's super legible, right? If I make something and you move, look at the sliders, look at this, it's ridiculous. So Nuke, what's happening is it is doing a terrible job at scaling for our 4K resolution. And this is basically unworkable. Now, you can technically still do the whole activity like this. It's going to be painful, but you could get through it. But we want to fix this so Nuke is at least scaling things up. So here's how you do it. When you find your version of Nuke, whichever one. So I'm typing it in. It's also my taskbar. Either right click on the app. You can go to open file location. Mine's on the taskbar, and I can right click on this first, then right click on the app. We're basically just trying to get to the properties. So right click on the properties for the software. When this thing pops up under compatibility, go down to change high DPI settings. We're going to click. This new window is going to pop up. Down here it says high DPI scaling override. You bet we want to override it. Override that, and then you change this. Once you turn this on, you can see this little drop down menu becomes active. I can see I can't use it. Change it to system enhanced, not that one, the second one. Hit OK, apply, OK. And once you do that, the next time you go into Nuke, you will notice that it looks way, way better. So that's going to be very important for you guys. Because we've had plenty of students go through the activity that don't do that, and they complain that it's like it was very difficult to see anything, which it would be. All right, so we're inside of Nuke. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring in a couple things into it. Let's just talk about the interface, the navigation, and then we'll start hooking some things together. So how do we bring stuff into Nuke? It's pretty straightforward. All you've got to do is if you have your folder open with the images you saved, you just simply drag them into this area down here. So I'm going to drag one first, right? And you can see that when I do that, it sort of loads in, and you can keep doing that. You can grab multiple at once, drag them in at the same time. That also works. Once you've got all four of those in there, we're just going to minimize this and just look strictly at Nuke. Now you can click and move these around. Yeah, and what other softwares did you guys have to do that with, by the way? Because I don't think that's the only time you guys do it. I didn't do it for Maya, but I think a lot of you guys might be doing it for Maya. Maybe Photoshop, but Nuke's kind of the big one. And I think I do it on Substance Painter, but you guys haven't installed that yet. But yeah, that is something you can at least remember. Even if you haven't done that properties thing before, it is something you can do in a lot of softwares if you ever notice it's not scaling properly. Okay, yeah. I don't know why I didn't have to do it for Maya. I know like my text might be kind of small in Maya compared to how some of you guys have it set up, but the default setting for Maya seemed to be okay for me. All right, so if you want to move around in the node graph, this is our main workspace. See how middle mouse wheel goes in and out? I'm just scrolling the wheel, very easy. If you do hold down the Alt button on your key, so I'm holding Alt, and I'm going to hold down my left mouse button. Alt, left click, and dragging the mouse back and forth is how we move around in the node graph. So middle mouse, Alt, left click, that's all you got to know. So as long as you know about zoom and the move around thing with Alt left, you're going to be able to navigate through Nuke. This is the same thing. This is eventually where we're going to see the image. Alt left, middle mouse, so it's the exact same controls because you're only working in 2D. Now there is a 3D part of Nuke that you guys will learn eventually, which is kind of like Maya, where we can like import stuff and set up lights and create new renders in here, but we're not going to get into any of that. Oh yeah, totally. Yep, I actually forgot about that. So I use Alt left out of habit, but you are right. Just the middle mouse button pushed in also does the same thing. So if you wanted to, you could just with the middle mouse, just move around completely with that and not even have your hand on the Alt key. So two ways to do the same thing. Now, inside of Nuke, there are going to be three main sections that you guys want to sort of focus on. There is a viewer up here. Think of this like the image tool. It's kind of like this guy. This is where we're seeing the information. You can also think of it kind of like the viewport, where you're viewing whatever it is we're working on. Now we have the property section on the right. This is like Maya's attribute editor. So if you end up like eventually double clicking on something, like if I double click on the read node here for bonus 4, I can see a bunch of attributes for it. So just like when you guys click on like a cube or a light in Maya, it shows up over here. It's kind of the same thing in Nuke. The main important thing that's different with Nuke is you know how in Maya, when you select something, you immediately see the settings for it, like it just shows up. When I select something, like just by single clicking on it in Nuke, see how nothing changes? Let me close out of this again so you can see. See how like I'm selecting, nothing pops up. Nuke, you need to double click to load up the settings for something. So double click, double click, double click, and it'll show you multiple things at once. So potentially if you had a lot of things in here, I could keep double clicking on a bunch of things and they would all just end up in this massive list on the right side. So one of the first things I'd like us to do is let's clean up this disaster in the properties area and prevent this from showing too much information. Right at the top, you can see there's a little number that says 10. This tells Nuke how many different things do you potentially want to see properties for at once. I would never need to see 10 things. That is ridiculous. I'm going to set this to like just one or two. Even two might be pushing it, but one is probably all we need. When you put it to one, that means anytime you double click, you always know this is the thing you're looking at. So I just like putting it to one because it's more like Maya. I don't need to see a bunch of things at once. Okay, so there's that already fixed. Now, the node graph, this is where we're going to be like connecting things together and building our first comp or our first composite. Now, I want to show you guys how do we get this information, like how do we view the stuff up here, right? You'll notice that in the node graph, there's this thing already kind of hanging out. This was here before I even brought in any image. It's called Viewer 1. This has suspiciously the same name as that guy, Viewer 1, Viewer 1. So it's almost like they are the same thing. So what Nuke wants you to do, if you want to see something up here, you have to connect it into this viewer node. And see how there's a little arrow sticking out of it? If you drag the arrow up to any of these and release, it will put it in the viewer. Now what I'm going to do is just back this up a little bit with middle mouse just so I can see the whole thing. Something like that, right? There I can see it. Now if I click and drag the arrow out and release, it'll break off. Drag up, disconnect. See, I'm just like dragging it to a node, disconnecting it, drag, pull it out, it's release, it disconnects. That's pretty easy. You may notice too, on under each of these images, that little like triangular looking thing sticking out, that is the same thing. So you don't have to go backwards. You could also go this way. It does the exact same thing. So it doesn't really matter which way you connect it. Most of the time, Nuke will figure out what you're trying to do. That's in the viewer. We see it. Now, there's a reason why you guys probably don't want to be doing it this way, even though I think it's important to understand that's how you can connect it. The issue with doing it that way is if you imagine having a much bigger comp where there's like hundreds of these guys everywhere, tons of nodes all connecting together, you don't want to constantly be worrying about where this viewer is so you can connect stuff to it. That's really, really annoying. So there, thankfully, is a shortcut to put stuff in the viewer without trying to hunt this thing down. Here's the preferred method. What you're going to do is just kind of keep it off to the side somewhere. You don't need to completely remove it, but just keep it off to the side. Click on the image you want to see. So I'm just going to select it. And I'm going to use the number keys at the top of my keyboard. So here's me clicking 1. See how it says the first input? Click on this. 1, 1, 1. All I'm doing is selecting what I want to see and hitting the 1 key on my keyboard. That immediately puts it in the viewer, and it's so much faster than ever dragging arrows into this stupid thing. So use the 1 key whenever you can. Now there is another way we can use number keys if you like to compare things. So let's say that you wanted to compare this light to this one, but you don't want to keep doing this back and forth. If you click on your first light and hit 1, just like I did before, I'm going to click on the second light and hit 2. Click on this, 3. Click on this and hit 4. And notice how there are 1, 2, 3, 4 inputs all going to the viewer. And if I have my mouse up here and hit 1, 2, 3, 4, you are able to go through all the different things you connected. So now I'm back with just a simple click of some keys. I can like flip back and forth between any of these guys to just compare, any of those renders that I've created instead of me, disconnecting everything or connecting everything one by one. So we're just going to click on that, hit 1. We're just going to keep it kind of simple and not do much of the other numbers. But if you want to do like the 1, 2, 3, 4 stuff and compare different inputs, you can totally do that. Disconnecting is very easy. You just grab the arrow and drag it out and release. It will disconnect automatically. I think it's a delete key. I think if you hit that and do backspace, nope. Oh, it used to. But yeah, just dragging it out will get rid of it. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, let's add these guys together. All right, let's merge them into one image. Hey, Alex, how's it going, buddy? So Alex is a previous student. He's popping in for the party. We're doing our Nuke stuff today. All right, so what we want to do is ideally get these images back to this, well, with the backlight. So I want to combine the images together. Now the good thing is this is very easy to do because Nuke has this thing built into it called a merge node. If you ever want to make a node in Nuke, there's a couple ways to do it. You can go through all their menus over here and painfully try to find what you want. Not recommended. You can also right-click right here. These are the same menus that were over here. So right-click brings up a shortcut to find nodes. And you're also more than welcome to go through here and find things. Like there's the merge node I need. This also has a hotkey. But kind of what's better, I think, for everybody is if you start to know what the name of the thing is you need, we're going to use the search function instead. So it's a little faster. So what I'm going to do is hit Tab, Merge. The list pops up. Click on Merge. There it is. And because Merge has a hotkey, you can also hit M. Now, a merge node is sort of like layers in Photoshop, where it's going to combine different images together and then, add or multiply them or do something to create a new result. Now, I could start dragging these up and trying to connect stuff. Like I can drag arrows down to it. Like you can totally start, throwing all the images into it. But if I want to look at this, let's see what happens. If I select it, I'm going to hit 1. Remember, 1 is how you view something. What does it look like when they're all crammed together? Hit 1. That's what it looks like. Currently, the merge node looks like that image right there, and it doesn't even seem to be picking these up at all. So let's just quickly disconnect everything. We're just going to drag all these out. There we go. Let's even delete the merge node. What I'm going to do is get these guys connected a little bit faster. We are going to marquee drag over all the images in a row. I'm going to hit M. So remember, M was the hotkey for merge, M. And see how when you have something selected and you hit the, you create a node or hit the hotkey with things selected, how it automatically connected it for us. So Nuke assumes if you have something selected and you make a node while something's selected, it thinks you're trying to connect that into it. So it just saves you a couple steps. Now this doesn't really fix anything because now if I view the merge node with 1, it still looks like the end. So it's the same issue. And the problem is that when you double click on the merge node, look at the properties over here. There's this thing called operation. It is currently set to over. Over is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to layer one image physically over top another one. So sort of like just putting different sheets of paper and drawings on top of another sheet of paper. You can't see through them at the moment. And so the only one it's picking up is the last input, which happens to be this guy, and that's the last one that covered everything. To combine the lights together, we want to set this to plus. So I just double clicked on the node, go up to operation, we're going to pick plus, and as soon as you pick plus, you can see it immediately looks like the final image, right? And we added that little backlight, so mine's a little bit different. Now, once we have all this connected, we are finally ready to make our color adjustments with the lights. So I'm going to move this down just a little bit to make some space. And we are going to click on our first light, and I'm going to make a color correction node. It's going to go right here. So we're going to make an exposure node. I'm going to hit Tab. We're going to type in exposure. We're going to pick it from a list. You can also do it this way if you click, right-click, color, exposure. That's the same thing. Okay, let's do it that way again. So right click, color, exposure. I could also make a node over here and connect it. So let's say that you didn't do that, like you didn't have it selected. You made an exposure, but then you notice like, oh, it's over here. How do I get this in here? Well, if you see how the arrows are going like this image into an exposure node, that result goes into the merge node. This goes to an exposure. The exposure goes out. So the arrows are pointing and showing you the direction the data is flowing. Nuke, if you drag this on that line, see how it lights up? It'll allow you just to release and it automatically snaps into place. So currently what's happening in here is if we start with this image, here's me hitting 1, I'm looking at the original image. So this is what it looks like. It goes into an exposure node. We're going to hit 1 to view that. And then that result is then merged with an add with all the other guys. So they're all doing the same thing. Image in to color correction, image in to color correction, over and over again. And then they're all ending up here. Now, when you make the exposure nodes, nothing is really going to change. It looks exactly the same. But if I double click on my first exposure node, look at the settings, I want you to watch what happens. So let's just view only the exposure node. I'm going to click on it and hit 1. So I'm looking at the node. I'm also editing. So double click, right? I can see it. I've hit 1. I'm looking at it. I'm going to move any of these RGB sliders up and down. See how it's like making it brighter and darker, right? It's very grainy, but it's definitely working. Now, you can also view the end and still work on this. So if I click on the merge node and hit 1, see what's happening? We're looking at the result of all the images together, but I'm editing the intensity for the first image before it was combined together. So what you're kind of seeing here is this is probably the first time you guys have really seen node editing and why this is so powerful, because since it's broken up into these little modular pieces, you're able to edit very specific parts of a project without breaking something farther down the pipeline. And we're only doing it for lights, but you can get very creative with this stuff. And I could like have different images for like different textures, individual objects in the scene, different visual effects coming from a different part of the pipeline. Those can be controlled separately. We're just combining them all together at the end, but you still have the ability to tweak them a little bit individually. It's cool stuff, right? So that's one. Now, let me kind of go back to this and view the exposure node again, right? So it's brighter and darker, but what you guys might be noticing is that when I'm moving the slider around, see how RGB are all moving together? This is just making the image brighter and darker. It's not allowing me to change the color. So the reason why the color is not changing is because of this one little button right here called gang. So gang means all the 3 channels move together. Because I guess they're in a gang, so they all move together. If we uncheck gang, I can now move them independently and shift the color, because if I remove green, look what's happening. It's starting to like become richer, and we're picking up a lot more of the red and blue. If I pull the red out, look what happens. Now we're getting into purple because blue's a lot more dominant, right? I can push the green. And now we're getting a mix of primarily blue and green, and there's really no red at all. So we're completely changing the color where we started with this, and now we're ending up with that guy, right? And it's a lot brighter too. And if I turn back on, you can see they all now move together. It's a little hard to see that probably in the screen share, but those little sliders right there are maintaining their offset. So they're either linked or unlinked, depending on if that's turned on or off. You can change color or change the intensity. Okay. Whoop, I think my stream just shut off here. There we go. That may have just dropped out for you guys, but I was just talking about how to change intensity. Okay. Let's do this again. And let's do this for the other lights. I'm going to view the Merge Plus. You can already see it's changing now that we've changed that one light. If you want to see the change, by the way, and compare it, if you click on the exposure node, so I'm viewing the result together. I'm clicking on the exposure node. I'm going to hit D to disable it. See how it's turning it off? So if I didn't have the exposure node here, it still looks like the original, but when I add the exposure node, this is what's changing. I'm making it a much brighter blue light. I kind of like where we're going with this already. Now let's just kind of quickly zip through the other ones. Let's do double click on the second exposure. I'm going to have this one be kind of faint, I think. And let's make this one, let me see here. So you do something kind of like that. Take the intensity up. Yeah, I'm going to leave it kind of a little cooler than the other one. I might pull that green out just a little bit. Okay, so we have our other one. So here's before and after. Actually, I'm almost kind of digging it the way it was before. Maybe I should push that green back in. Yeah, I might leave this one kind of the same. It's a little different, but we're not going to change that one too much. Now this one's our rim. Currently it's white, but if we double click, we could make a color just by offsetting these again. So you can see now we have this strong light pink because I'm pulling the green out. And so when you remove green, what's left? Red and blue. What do red and blue equal together? Basically like a purple, pink, or magenta. So you can see that's also happening in the background. And I'm just kind of moving these guys around, watching the thing update. I do kind of like that backsplash of like hot pink hitting the character. That's kind of fun. That's pretty cool, right? And we also got this guy right here. Here's our fourth exposure. So to show you what this looks like, it's the one behind everything. I'm going to bring this one up quite a bit, and let's see. I'm trying not to make this like too crazy, where it's like every color under the sun all combining together. Might do like a very subtle like warmth, almost like a yellow. But one thing I kind of like about this tone is because the blue and some of these other colors were hitting the top of the background. I kind of like that gradient where it's going from like that kind of warmy sunlight tone up to these other blues and red. It's kind of fun. This is a very almost has like a not really like a Tron, but like a futuristic kind of vibe to it, like something you'd see maybe in Blade Runner. So I'm going to drag through all these to select them. And let's hit D to disable every single exposure adjustment. Here's where we started. That's after. And this is all happening in real time. Because remember, in Maya, if you were doing this, you'd have to physically re-render the image when you're done with the new adjustments. This is us doing this and getting immediate feedback without re-rendering anything. We're just really just playing around with colors and math inside of Nuke to have each light look like it's a different color. And these are really cool too, because when you guys get into other classes and you start really getting comfortable with Nuke, there's all sorts of really interesting ways where you can basically keyframe and animate these attributes to make like effects like flickering light bulbs, like if you like a bad electrical connection, you're doing something kind of spooky, and you want this thing to pulse over time, we can totally do that inside of Nuke as well. So anything could be animated as well, but that's a whole other class. All right, now let me kind of go back here. I want to show you where we're already at with this thing. We're basically right here, where we've got the lights combining together. My little example is slightly different because I'm using backdrops. Oh, thank you. That was very nice, LMS. Let's do that again. I'm sure that has happened to you so many times before as well. Yeah, we have like backdrops, things are merging together. There's a little area down here for the exposure nodes. This is the only thing we're really missing. So I want to show you this little thing right here. So the vignette. A vignette looks like this. You guys have seen it, you just may not know that's what it's called. It's like this stuff where you have your photo and it kind of fades to like darker tones and values on the outside, brighter, that fade to the edge. We're just trying to create like a little bit of a gradient on the image so it's not just completely flat. So we're going to add this inside of Nuke. Now, it's not too difficult to do. It's probably going to be the hardest part of the activity, I think, for you. But if you follow this step by step and just watch how I'm connecting it, it's not too bad. So the first thing with the vignette we want to do is make the node to darken the image in general. Exposure nodes can do that. So we're going to use an exposure node to darken the frame. So I'm going to click on the merge. We're going to use tab, and I'm going to type in exposure. Let's make our exposure node under here. Right, so we get an exposure node for each light. Now I have an exposure node for everything, right? I can make the whole thing brighter and darker because they've all been combined together at this point. Let me just put this back to 0 for a moment. Now I'm going to make the nodes to darken it to the edge. We have to do a couple things to make this exposure node work properly. Let's move this down a little bit more. We're going to hit tab, and I'm going to make another node called radial. So radial, radial draw. We're going to click. And I want you to see what the radial looks like separately. So it's not even connected to anything. It's just hanging out. We're going to click, hit 1. And let me go back and forth so you can see the difference. This and this. Now, even though you may not understand quite what's happening, I'm sure you can notice that for some reason when I go between this image that we're working on and this radial, that it looks like the whole viewer is like popping weird. It's like the radials, looks like it's here, but then when I go to view the radial, like where's the image go? Like just something doesn't feel right. So the problem with the radial is when you make it, this is sort of like you creating a new image in Nuke. It will default to whatever resolution Nuke is set to. Now currently it's using this weird 2K resolution called 2K Super 35. We are not using 2K Super 35. I mean, if you look at your render at the bottom corner over here in the viewer, it'll tell you what your resolution is. You guys all remember this. You set it up before. It's a 720 by 1080. The problem is that Nuke doesn't know that's what everything should be using. So let's delete the radial. We'll click on it and hit backspace to get rid of it. So just like Maya. We're going to first hit S to go to Nuke settings. So S is the shortcut for project settings. In here, right over here in the properties for the settings, this is where you have to change it. Pick your image resolution from the list. It's going to be at the bottom. Once it's set to the right resolution for the project, the next time you guys make a radial, you'll notice that when you view it, which again is just click on whatever you want to see, hit 1. See how it's now the right size? Here's the exposure, here's the radial. Now, I'm not saying it's like 100% correct, but at least it's not popping. It understands how big it should have been. Now I am going to save this too because we're already in the middle of it. I don't want to lose anything. So if you want to save your Nuke script, it's just like saving a Maya file. You're going to do File. In this case, you're going to do Save Comp As. So this is called a comp. Save Comp As. We're going to go to the character project. So you have to kind of navigate through here. Don't double click on these, by the way, because double click will send you 2 folders in. These are single clicks. It's kind of weird. But I'm going to go in that Nuke folder I set up, and I'm going to call this Final Comp. Or you can name it whatever you want. Final Comp. And you just leave it as a .nk, hit save. It'll save the script. It's already saved. So we haven't lost anything. I can always open that up again if this crashes. But what I want to do is get the radial connected to the exposure node. Because remember, I'm trying to get that darkening effect, the vignette, towards the corner. So let me show you how to connect it first, and then we'll talk about what we have to fix. You'll notice that on the right side of an exposure node, there's this little triangle that's like, you can pull that out, and when you do, it says mask. Now, do you guys remember what masks are? If any of you have used Photoshop, After Effects, you've probably run into this thing before. A mask is sort of like an alpha. It's going to determine with a black and white image where something is visible or where something happens. So that's what this is going to try to do. So again, think of this like an alpha channel. Now, what's going to happen here is I want to drag this out. So we're dragging the arrow that's already on the right side of the exposure node out and up to the radial. So we're dragging it back here and release. The radial is now going into the mask. Again, think of this like an alpha, going into the mask input of the exposure node. Now I'm going to click on exposure again, just because I want to make sure you guys get it. If I move, you know how before when I moved this up and down, like the whole image was getting brighter and darker? Watch what happens when I move it up and down this time. See how something's different? You can tell that it's happening where this guy was located. So depending on the value or how bright that white is determines how much this is being affected. So you can make it darker in the middle, you can make it lighter, and do this kind of weird effect like that. I don't know why I'd want it. Looks like it has a beard. I don't know why we're doing this, but let's put it back to 0. The issue is that it's not going to the corner because the radial isn't going to the corner. The radial is this little soft kind of oval in the center. It needs to go all the way to the edge. Okay, so let's reset the exposure back to 0 again. We're going to start this over. Instead of the radial going directly into the exposure, I need to make it bigger. So if you click on the radial and hit T, as in transform, it will make a transform node. Now, obviously, you can do the tab, transform. You can do it that way. It's right there. It's the same thing. So there's a lot of ways to make the nodes. But you'll notice that the way this looks now, try to ignore this weird line going to the viewer. Let me move this over so that's not kind of confusing. It is the radial going into a transform. So then we're going to use a transform to make it bigger. The result of the transform after it's bigger is then what goes over to this guy. So I'm just going to click on the transform and hit 1 so you can see it. And then double click, make sure you see the properties for the transform. Take the scale slider and just scale it up. And now because I'm looking at this in the viewer, I can see what scale's doing. It's just like scale in Maya, it makes it bigger. And I'm going to go to right around 3 so I see the gradient go all the way to the edge of the frame. Okay, now I'm going to go to the exposure node. Now that I've fixed this, let's go to the exposure and hit 1. Move this over again. I can disconnect that second input. Notice how there's a giant crosshair showing up. That's the transform nodes. Because I can also do this to move what's happening. But I'm just going to do Control-Z to undo that. If this thing bothers you, just X out of the transform node to get rid of the controller. So you're not as soon as you bring this up and see the properties, that's when that thing keeps popping up. So I'm just going to close out of it. I'm just going to view the exposure. We're going to double click, and I'm going to move this up and down again, just like we did before. Now look what's happening. It is working. Now what we're trying to do is get it to darken the edge. Now see what's happening is currently it's making the center brighter or darker. Remember, I want to get the edge darker. This is doing the opposite. It's controlling the middle. How do I fix it so it controls the edge? The problem is that this thing is basically visually inverted. We're seeing that the center is where it's affecting stuff. I want it to affect it on the edge. So I need to invert this to get it to work. So if I view the exposure again, so we're back here again, I'm going to double click in the exposure, and you'll see there's a little section right here called mask that has a little checkbox on it. That's this guy. It's using a mask, but if you look to the right, there's a button that says, hey, you can invert what the mask is doing. And if I flip it and then move this around, watch what happens. That's, if I bring it darker, see how it's darkening to the corner? This is the vignette. So we have to invert it, drag that down. This thing right here, I know it's a little confusing. This is like a lot. Like you guys are probably missing the stuff up here. Like, oh man, this was a fun time before we got into this crazy business. It will take you a little bit to get that figured out. It's just because it's the first time you've used Nuke. Just watch the video a couple times, practice connecting and deconnecting stuff. Click on nodes, hit 1 to view it. Think about how your data is traveling together. It's just different inputs funneling together to end up at one result. Now, the one thing I will say is that when you do bring the exposure down and get the effect, because I can see it, one issue I would say I have is that because it is darkening everything to the edge, sometimes you'll notice your image does get a little kind of just dark everywhere, and you still want to keep intensity in the middle. Sometimes what I will do is I'll add another exposure node. This is optional, like before it gets to this one. And I don't need to connect anything into this. I just use it as like another way to like make the whole image brighter. So I'll boost this up before. So it's like I have all the lights coming together. I make it brighter, and it looks too bright here, but because it's brighter, when it hits the vignette, it sort of like kind of like counterbalances what's going on. So this is just me sort of making sure that that vignette doesn't darken things too much. I'm just giving it a little bit more juice and intensity right before it hits it. Now, if you want to see what it looks like without any of this stuff, if you click on both exposure nodes and hit D for disable, this is without any exposure and vignette adjustments. That's with it. So it's very flat. This gives you sort of that center focus that we can now, where it gives more of a gradient to the center of the frame. Pretty cool, right? And I can undo everything. That, hold shift, go through the exposures. Here's me turning off everything before and after. There's a big difference, right, from where we started. All happening in real time. Now, the only thing that's left, for you guys before you present it, because we just did all this stuff right here, is writing the final result out of Nuke. Now, technically, you don't need to do this because as long as you have the Nuke script open, I can still see what the image looks like in Nuke, so you don't have to do this. But I do want to show you how you save this out, just in case you want to keep it, on your hard drive or post it somewhere, whatever you want to do. So we're just going to make a write node after all this. So read is the node that loads images in. Write is how you get them out. So read and write. So we're going to make this guy, choose where we want to save it, name the image, pick the file format, just like you guys have done before with the image tool. And then we're just going to tell it to render the image, and we're done. And after that, it's really just you guys going through the presentation and showing off what you just did, and then talking about what you learned this month. So let's try it out. I want to write out and save the final thing right here. I'm kind of liking it. We're going to click on the exposure, tab, make a write node. This also has a shortcut, which is W. So if you want to hit W, that will make a write node for you. Now on the write node, it will, eventually we're going to hit the render button, it's going to render whatever is going into it. That means if you happen to have it connecting to the wrong information, like it's now going to render this as the image. So it's whatever's going into it is what it captures. If it's up here and it's like the exposure node from this is going into it, when you render it out, it's going to be that. So you have to be kind of careful where this is sitting. So I want that final image there to go into it. In the properties, there's file. We're going to hit folder. I'm going to go to my desktop. You can also get to there through like home, desktop. So you'll kind of get the hang of this whole section. I have a couple things bookmarked. You can add bookmarks with the plus button, but desktop. Those are all my all of my screenshots. That's great. Character project. I'm going to put it in that same Nuke folder. Once you find out where you want to save it, right here at the bottom, this is where you type in the image name. So let me just check what I had in the documentation. It was modified render. Okay, so I'm going to type it in, modified render. Now the key with this thing to get it to work is you have to, this is one of those times where you have to type in the file extension. And I know I've talked to some of you guys about this individually before, how you don't need to do that. Like when you save your Maya file, you don't have to type .mb. We do have to do this for Nuke. Nuke is this weird outlier. We have to type in .png in order for this to save properly. So when you choose the file extension at the end and type in .png and hit save, you'll notice that below it, this automatically swapped over to a PNG format. So it's recognizing what you're trying to do. It's like, oh, you typed in .png, you must mean you want to make a PNG. Yes, that is right. Now, once you have got that set up and it's like named, the right folder, that says PNG, you're basically done. All you do is hit render, and it's going to render that image. So render, input 1 to 1, Yep, we don't want to change anything with frames because we're not doing a frame sequence. It's just one. Hit continue, and it's already done. That's how long it takes to render. It's not like you're waiting 30 minutes like in Maya. It's been done for a while. It's just an instant result. So if I, oh god, this is so frustrating. If I go to the character project and then look at the Nuke folder, there it is. It's my modified render. So that is our final result outside of Nuke. Even though we started with this, we have now saved out lights individually, played around with the color, came up with something completely new and different. We built our first comp. It's not too challenging of a project. It's just different because node editing is a completely different workflow compared to in Maya moving around with 3D. But some of you guys, I can tell you, after you play around with Nuke for a little bit, and after getting out of shading lighting 2, when you're using the hypershade, which is another part of Maya we haven't really done much with, when you kind of get through these different things, a couple of you are really, really going to like node editing, and there's a bunch of softwares that you might be interested in looking into. Like compositors that use Nuke love node editing, obviously. It's node editing in the hypershade. There's another software some of you guys might use down the road called Substance Designer. That one's node editing, where it's all nodes connecting together to make textures and materials. It's like a procedural software. All sorts of cool stuff like that. Anyway, I kind of like the result we got out of this thing. I don't know what you guys think about it, but that was our crash course into Nuke. Not too bad, right? And these get crazy, by the way. If you want to give yourself a panic attack, just go to Google and type in something like large Nuke script. Just wait till you start looking at some of these things where they're all organized in these crazy trees. They can get pretty beefy on how all these different things connect together. But it's almost like looking at a circuit board, actually, like how electricity travels throughout the board. It's cool stuff. All right, guys. Well, I think that's all I got for you. I'm gonna post, the link to you guys tomorrow morning when I get back. So keep an eye out for that. Use this as your guide through the entire week 4 project. And once you're done with all the Nuke stuff, just record your presentation, upload it to YouTube, and you guys are done with Shading and Lighting 1. If I don't get a chance to talk to you guys before the week's over, thanks for being a good group. Appreciate everybody hanging out with me in the live sessions, and I will see you all in a few months when you get to my second class, Shading and Lighting 2. All right, guys, that's all. Hope everybody has a good night.